This next panel is another exciting one for me because it's about businesses doing some really exciting things. And we are going to talk about sustainability with surfboard manufacturing. And I think this idea of the first zero-waste surfboard factory has applications outside of the surf industry as well. And our moderator today is my friend Angela Sun. And if you don't know her, she's an amazing journalist, great storyteller, and you might have seen her documentary, Plastic Paradise, The Great Pacific Garbage Patch. If you haven't seen it, it is still relevant and worth watching, and it has had so much impact on the plastics movement. But I'm so excited to have her here to moderate this panel. So please welcome Angela Sun.
So I'm very excited to be here and to introduce this next panel and our next panelist, Ryan Harris, setting up over there. He's the founder and owner of Earth Technologies and Ryan Harris Shapes, H2 Sup. Ryan doesn't sleep much. He's always running about, as you can see, and he's constantly striving for a greener and more sustainable use of materials to build boards with. And he's been committed to building eco-boards with alternative materials for a better part of the decade. So he's been ahead of the curve this whole time. Very excited to chat with you and talk a little bit about what you're up to. So welcome, Ryan from Ryan Harris Shapes. It's still morning. Everyone got coffee? We're all good? So Ryan, first, last year you were here glassing and doing a demonstration at the event, but we didn't really get to hear your story. Before we get into the Eco Surfboard, tell us a little bit about you were from Oregon and you were biracial. How much did your background affect your decision and getting into surfing?
Well, I guess, long story short, I'm an environmentalist, just about like everybody here, and I didn't really know that till I got into the surfboard industry and kind of realized how bad it was, and nobody talks about it. They're just, it's really sad, honestly. They're very toxically made traditionally, and about 11 years ago, I got in on this bioepoxy, and that's kind of what started it.
Whoa, hold up. Before we start, though, we want to hear your story. When did you start surfing? You're from Oregon.
I grew up in
ocean.
It's a trek. I grew up in Portland, which is about an hour and a half, a 3-hour round trip to surf, and it was cold and sharky. So I hit the slopes. My dad put me on water skis when I was like 3. And I actually, growing up biracial, my dad's black. He's actually from Oakland, and my mom's from Central Oregon. I started playing basketball, but I was really little and I wasn't that good at it, so I just kind of rebelled and started doing all these crazy outdoor sports. And so I guess that's my background, but I kind of started surfing a little in college up there. It was more like a rites of passage
We're in
thing.
dry suit or something?
Yeah, basically.
I'm a chicken in
this
cold
much
water.
skin, right? Booties, hoodie, gloves. And I moved down here when I was 21 and basically I fell in love with the sport and the culture, because there really wasn't a surf scene in Oregon. A bunch of loggers surfing, kind of, I guess. And immediately started doing my own repairs, and I'm a pretty big dude compared to the stereotypical pro surfer, so I immediately started trying to make my own equipment.
So you've been doing this for quite a while.
About 20 years.
And you talked about bioresin a little bit, but first off, Clark Foam, right? They had a monopoly on surf blanks and in the industry in general. And you mentioned that it was pretty toxic, what boards are made out of. What did that shutdown mean for you?
It's the best thing that's happened in our industry, in my opinion, because all these other alternative materials started popping up, right? So traditional boards at the time, I think they had a 95% market share, is Clark Foam. And that's a polyurethane foam. And so then the boards are glassed with polyester resin. All petroleum-based products. And so when that company, they literally passed out a letter and closed overnight. And it was for environmental reasons. They had multiple employees that had gotten various forms of cancer, and he had to shut his doors. He actually lives in Oregon now on a huge ranch and, collected his millions and then basically abruptly retired. But It meant that there had to be another way to, the surfboard industry is not going to just close down overnight. So it meant that styrofoam or EPS, that all of a sudden started to be a thing, a more viable way of making boards. And with that was epoxy. You use epoxy resin, which at the time was also petroleum-based, but you didn't have the toxic fumes. So when people see kind of the board building picture, it's a guy with a planer, mowing foam, and a glasser with a gnarly chemical mask on because the fumes are very bad. They attack your nervous system and eventually kill you. And nobody talks about that, but I love to talk about it.
So opening the doors up to innovation with that shutdown, what did that lead to?
Within 2 years, the bioepoxy was invented by a couple close friends of mine, and that's really what started this path for me towards eco-boards. Honestly, this guy came into the traditional shop I was working at the time, and I didn't know any better, and there weren't really any other alternatives. So I'm huffing the fumes, I'm painting boards, going home at night, and the wifey's basically, you reek. And so this guy with this bioepoxy walks in, and it looks like sap. It's amber, and which honestly at the time it didn't do that well in the market because a brand new board is bright white. An older board yellows over time, so that's what it's a negative connotation when you see a yellow board. But my boards didn't break anymore; they were really strong. And so I looked at it as a performance attribute, and just full circle, just stopped doing toxic boards, lost half of my customers. There's a little bit of disconnect because I had to raise my prices.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. How feasible or sustainable is it to be an eco-shaper? You've kind of led the way in doing this, but it seems like the innovations are so new, which still...
We're 10 years into it now.
Okay.
So, it's kind of evened out. There's a lot of other companies doing it. Firewire is a big one. They did the switch, and they use the resin on all their boards. But I just wanted to mention a program and a company that's helped a lot is Sustainable Surf. They have the EcoBoard project, which is a little logo. If I turn this around without knocking it over, see that little X down there? So it's basically a verification system that they put in place through lots of research that says, okay, well, this is what makes a board eco. And so there's different criteria that predicate what an eco board is. And if you're part of that, you get this little logo. So it just kind of helps the consumers see and know there are other options out there. And so they're telling the story.
That is very cool. And it says gold level on there. Gold level. So going back a little bit, though, how did you fund this very big endeavor that, this is years back now, you're like, I'm going to make eco boards. I'm going to change the surf industry. Because it is kind of ironic, or it is weird that we are in the ocean, in the elements, with the surfboards, which happen to be very toxic to create.
Well, even 10 years ago, I was like this small backyard guy. I was still bartending at the time. It was very part-time. It was more of a hobby. I was super passionate about it, but it took a lot of support from Regina, from the wife. I basically blame her. She said, do it, pursue it. You're doing something different. It's better for the environment. It'll catch on. And it didn't. It didn't. It did not catch on. People thought I was crazy. Dude, your boards are yellow. They're ugly. And there were a couple other lunatics who got in on it at the ground level, and one of which is my ex-partner. He's actually a military vet and retired. He's in Vegas, I think. But he was doing bamboo fabric on boards with epoxy, which I thought was really cool, with the same bioepoxy. So we joined forces, this is about 7-8 years ago, and launched E-Tech. And that was in Hawthorne, home of the Beach Boys. And that was the first eco-board production facility. And meaning, we had our own board line, but we wanted to, hey, if you want an eco-board, come to us. And so, side note, that wasn't going very well. Then I broke my neck. And within 6 months,
Where did you break your neck?
Surfing in the South Bay on a closeout.
Wow.
But I actually think, the Clark foam thing and then me breaking my neck were the two best things that happened for me, because all of a sudden I had this fire. I literally couldn't move. I'm sitting on my butt just thinking of ways we can get this going, and lost Surfboards started knocking on the door, then Channel Islands, then Timmy Patterson, and all these labels. As soon as one big label said, okay, this is cool, you're doing something cool, and it's good for the environment, and the boards look relatively normal, it just took one big company, and pretty much everything else fell into place.
So sustainability is something that, a lot of us in the eco world are, it gets thrown around a lot. Zero waste gets thrown around a lot. But how long does it actually take to go completely zero waste? And what does that look like?
So now we're gonna just catch up. So making eco boards is great, but it's kind of the lesser of all evils. So we're switching from a traditionally toxic resin to a bio resin, which is okay, great. It's got a bio base, but the process of making surfboards is still, you create a ton of waste. And working with Sustainable Surf, some of the numbers we've been able to figure out is, and that's why I actually have this board here and some of the things I'm going to show you. So a traditional shortboard, this weighs about 5.5 pounds. Through the process of making board, there's about 5.5 pounds of waste generated just to make that board in the glassing facility.
The same amount that
as
is
the weight.
waste as
Yeah,
it weighs.
and that's actually not that much because of the epoxy. And comparing the bio-epoxy to a traditional resin, they're just different.
When you say
viscosity.
bioresin, does that mean that that board will break down in a landfill?
It does have a natural biodegradation cycle,
Okay.
but there's fiberglass in it. So the short answer is not really.
Okay.
And styrofoam, when you look at and see what's floating in the oceans, it's styrofoam and plastic. EPS, styrofoam. But the key here is, although it's not a biocore, you can continue to recycle it and keep it out of the landfill. So basically, I had this idea in my head, well, we're still creating a lot of trash. I got to reduce it somehow because, cans, plastic bottles, and cardboard, that's all I know, right? And we don't have a whole lot of things in the shop that are made from that. So I just kind of started thinking out of the box and basically, see this giant sign here that has worms and critters on it? A year and a half, almost 2 years ago, I got an email, and it was time-lapse of a broken stand-up paddleboard, which is EPS foam, being eaten from the inside out. And I thought it was fake. I thought it was CGI because I was like, what is that? And it's bioremediation, and there's these special critters, these mealworms, that have an internal, they have basically a gas that allows them to take an inorganic material and turn it organic. So these mealworms eat styrofoam, and the process, their byproduct, is organic soil. And that is the Living Earth Systems, and who founded that is Eddie Garcia. And so he contacted me and said, hey, look, let's do this. And I was kind of his first.
And no one else was doing this at the time, right?
Nobody. And
this made headlines
yeah, it was
all over the world.
It was
in
a
the
pretty big
news
story.
cycle about these mealworms that eat styrofoam, and
So
there
they'll
was been
take
a lot of
that.
tests.
They will literally take that, and you can see there's just some bits and chunks of foam right there, right? They're just devouring it. And what they'll do is they'll eat about a board in a week.
So how is this possible, though, to scale? Can we scale this?
I'm not the expert. I don't have a bunch of worms at my shop. Eddie's in charge of that. But basically, it's a global saver. If you look at, they also eat wood, and one of the other things he was testing is to see if they can eat the traditionally toxic foam, the petroleum-based polyurethane foam. And so he also was feeding them like neoprene and all sorts of stuff just to see. But it's a whole, don't try this at home sort of thing. It's a whole ecosystem of like earthworms and beetles and all these things that kind of feed off each other.
So
but it's
radical
amazing.
collaboration, that's kind of what we all are all about here. And, in general, I think in the sustainability world, we all want to work together. So you found a way to work with Eddie and with the bioresin.
Right.
And then what's happened?
So
Zero waste.
as soon as this mealworm thing, every time I talk about it, I start chuckling because it's still crazy to me. Well, as soon as that happened, I realized, wait a second, we've just reduced my waste by almost 40%. So I looked at my factory and took each room and kind of just did it as a case-by-case basis. And the shaping room was easy because it's shaping dust foam and like stringer scraps. So all that's gone. Now you look at the lambing room and the sanding room, and those are different waste streams. But what I did is I just started to think about how they recycle everything. I just categorized everything. And so before I had a system in place, I started sorting and categorizing everything and putting it in bags and just hoarding it. And then I honestly I did a ton of research and figured out I can just get some heavy-duty pieces of machinery that will densify my waste streams, i.e. high-density plastic shredder. So resin is plastic. And so if resin coats everything, if we've got resin-coated fiberglass, resin-coated, and getting into some of our waste streams that you can't just put in a recycling bin, that's resin off of a board. That's resin and fiberglass. And so basically, once it's all coated, it goes into the shredder, and the shredder then densifies my waste stream. So we're left with this, kind of this pulp, right? Now, this pulp is structural. This is all, and you feel free to come up here when I'm done talking and check it out. But basically, we then add our excess resin to that, and we put it in product molds, because what you have is all that stuff is structural.
Such as the things you have up there,
Yeah,
right?
such as the things I have up here. So this is, if you look at the colors of this board, and you look at the colors in this hand plane, that is a product made from the waste of this board. See the hot pink? And then we also have coasters that we're doing out of the excess resin. So we're literally upcycling as we create products.
And we talked a little bit before this panel about the linear versus circular. So how is this a model that can translate to other businesses, perhaps for people who don't make surfboards who want to put it into their business, this zero waste circular system?
Well, what we've tapped into that I think is really, really important is, the whole world, basically, our economy is, we've got this linear system, this disposable, throw it away, go buy another one, throw it away, go buy another one. Well, we've got this circular system where we're literally do the whole cradle to grave analysis. Stuff's not going to end up in the landfill. You're making a better product to start with. It's more viable, it's longer lasting, and utilizing all of our trash that we've made to make new products and keep it out of the landfill. We have a circular system. So other industries can use that, because honestly, the surfboard industry is kind of a joke, and it's peanuts compared to much bigger industries.
Yeah.
There are some companies in the apparel, like Patagonia is one that comes to mind, where there's all sorts of different board shirts made from recycled plastic bottles, and there's people doing stuff already, but we're talking full scale, totally circular, all your waste.
So conscious consumerism is another word or phrase that gets thrown around a lot. How do we link the people here together? Like, what is it that's worked for you in collaborating with people or finding people? Do they find you? You find them? Like, is it just?
It's, at the end of the day, a lot of it's networking, and it's about telling the story. The average consumer doesn't even know this is possible. And so this is a really good example. This board is for the Jessie Miley Dyer. She's the World Surf League's women's commissioner. So that's huge for me just because of who she is. And so she's basically in charge of all these pros and running the contests, and that's exposure. So she can help tell the story. I have a mentor and a really close friend who's the president of all media for the WSL, who's offered to host us whenever I want to tell story, talk story, whatever. But on Earth Day, we're launching all of our Greenline Surf products, and that's what we're calling everything we make out of our trash. So I launched the zero waste system about a year ago. But one of the things you asked me is, how did I take on that venture and help pay for it? I launched a Kickstarter campaign and crowdfunded the whole thing. That's how I got the muscle. We call the muscle this the shredder.
So for those who know and who have done Kickstarters before, it is very hard. Tell us about this process, because I don't think people talk about the accolades or when you get to your funding point. But what was the process like for you?
I had some friends that did a very successful one in December, and basically they said, wait, because I was going to try and do it right before Christmas, and they're like, just wait. It's a full-time job. I'm still, to this day, finishing up rewards a year later. And but honestly, I'm grateful and thankful for it. But it in and of itself helped spread the word and get the word out there of what we're doing in this zero waste system.
What is your hope for going forward?
Well, and Vibe touched on this when we talked earlier. My hope is that, I didn't patent any of this. I don't want to. This is, in my opinion, everybody in the surf industry should be building boards this way. My hope is that other glass shops will, I can train them on how to do it. And that, a lot of people, surfing is, what do you call it? Trendy, catchy, sexy. There's a million ways to describe it. Yeah, it's a lifestyle thing, but it's awesome. And a lot of people that don't surf, pay attention to it. My hope is that, because a lot of people watch it, that they can take this story and apply it to their industry and that we can, collectively do better.
And how have you used, and we talked about Kickstarter a little bit, how have you used social media as a platform or the media in general? How can we use, as a business, the media as a platform to share messages like these or get the word out?
It is a massive, viable tool to tell story and talk story and spread positive messages. So that's honestly,
Or how important is that
it's
to
very
your
important.
business, I guess,
I
yeah.
don't even, we have a website and everything, but we do everything through Instagram and Facebook, and another gift was one of my team writers was the social media coordinator for the WSL. So they got a hold of the zero waste story and had this little, 60-second clip of the mealworms eating foam, and it helped. But yeah, it's really all about continually putting the message out there and doing a lot more work than just building boards.
How many boards do you shape, like per month?
I don't know. A lot. But it's not just me. I've got obviously I have a whole crew. But yeah, a lot of it is about networking and getting other people to tell your story. I do this a lot. I like to get out there and talk about it and do Q&As and panels, and however I can tell my story, I'll do it.
We also talk about bespoke items, right? Handcrafted, conscious consumerism.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see this as just a trend or something that's just going to keep continually growing?
It's definitely not a trend. I think it's going to continue to grow. I mean, what's crazy is I've never, and everybody that sees it is like, what is that? I've never seen anything like that before. Resin coasters, hand planes made from shred. I mean, it's also what's cool is you can see the trash.
Yeah.
You can literally see stir sticks, gloves, resin chunks. So it's, we're not fake at the funk, so to say. There's a little fin. Now, if you look at this fin, see all the different colors, that is literally layer upon layer upon layer of excess resin built up into a fin panel, which is made out of excess fiberglass. And then we grind it down and shape it into a fin. And you can see that's essentially trash. That would normally end up on the ground floor.
And you're repurposing and
Yeah.
upcycling. So we have a little bit of time if anyone has questions.
So one of the other things I didn't really explain, we have a board. So, what happens when you go buy a six-pack of beer? There's a deposit. And when you return the cans, you get a little deposit back. We have that set up with our boards where, when you're done with the board, bring it back and we'll dispose of it so it doesn't end up in a landfill, which basically it's a little Ryobi tool. Get the fiberglass shell off of it, shred it. So we now can make a hand plane or whatever we want out of that shell. And then we'll either reshape the foam or the foam will go back to the blank supplier, in this case Marco Foam. They're out of Irvine. And they have the only recycled blank program, which is also something that the Sustainable Surf does, where they take post-consumer packaging, styrofoam, old boards, and they basically densify it and recycle it into these new blanks. And so that's our whole specific cradle, case by case, board by board. The fins, well, the hope is they're forever fins. Like, they're made so well, they're going to outlive most of the consumers. Yeah. But, eventually I'm going to have to train somebody to get them back and shred those when I get old. Right.
Any other questions? I do have a question if somebody else doesn't want to jump in. So, like, I have a quiver of boards, but they're all the old polyurethane foam and the Clark foam blanks and stuff. What can we do in terms of, I don't know, recycling that? Like, if it's cradle to cradle.
Yeah,
we're
that
talking about.
sucks. They're not.
Maybe I'll just keep it on my
wall.
wall.
Yeah, it doesn't have an eco core, and because people have asked me, well, would you shred old? No, I don't want to touch it. It's toxic.
Right.
So part of this, one of the reasons I also decided to start using better, smarter, healthier materials is I don't want to die when I'm 50.
Right.
And every year we lose some craftsman who's been huffing fumes, and he has some OMA, right? Some form of cancer derived from making toxic surfboards. So it's, again, the lesser of all evils, and being able to do what I love for as long as possible. And then, kind of training the next generation on how to do it. We recently just hired a bunch of interns that don't build boards, but they follow us. And again, it's about teaching and educating everybody to do what's better.
God bless the interns.
Right.
Anybody else have questions? All right.
Cool. Yeah, you guys want
We
to
have-
see any of
we
this
have
stuff,
10 minutes.
just come on up, check it out.
Let's. We have some extra time, so we can talk a little story.
Or I can just call people out of the audience that I know and ask their opinion on eco boards. We can do that. Zach, Kevin.
There he is, Zach Weisberg.
I think one of the questions I get is why doesn't everybody do eco boards? And I'm going to let Zach answer that question. Why are people hesitant to buy an eco board? What's the disconnect? Mm-hmm. Yep. No, and it's basically it's a one-man show. It's Eddie Garcia's deal, and we need to get. Honestly, I want to see him get some funding so he can, because it's not cheap. I think for that batch, for that amount, which was what I say, one board a week. It's I don't know how many actual worms it is, but it's a $2,000, which doesn't sound like much, but they age out. They
Did
actually
you say they turn into beetles?
They turn into
and they
beetles, which is
fly?
why I don't have them at my shop. I don't want a bunch of beetles. Seriously, you have cockroaches here. It's disgusting. No, they're beetles. I think he said as worms. A year. Kevin might be able to help me with this. Do you know? What's the lifespan of the mealworms before they age out and turn into beetles? A year. That's what I thought. Okay. So
We have a question in the back and then over here after.
So with any products, there was no refilters from the mainstream market.
Well, I realized the performance attributes. That's actually why I switched. Not because it was eco 11 years ago, because it wasn't proven yet. But my boards didn't break. So the boards are actually better than the status quo. They're better than the legacy technology that's out there. They're better. And that's what, in any other sport, this is what kills me. Think about basketball shoes. Think about baseball bats. Think about any sporting good equipment. Surfboards, for the most part, the technology hasn't changed in 60 some odd years. The foam and fiberglass board was invented 60, 70 plus years ago, and people are still using the exact same recipe. Epoxy boards are different. They bend, they flex. Everybody talks about flex. They have better performance attributes. They flex better. They have better longevity. They're livelier. You get a better projection in and out of your turns. I could literally, I'm not going to do it here, because she'll probably see it and want to kill me, but I could stomp up and down on this board upside down, and it's just going to bend and flex and bend and flex, where a traditional board might even snap in half if I did that. When epoxy first came out, well, actually still, there's usually about $100 markup just because the resin's more expensive. But, consumers get that sticker shock, but the reality is if the board's going to last 3 to 4 times longer, you're going to save money, right? While your traditional pilot boards are snapping like twigs, your, bio-epoxy eco board is still flexing and performing the way it did when you first got it. So
We had a question over here, and then we'll go back to Kevin. Oh, yeah.
well, all I know is that this whole living Earth system, the beetles do work too. Like, it's just, there's worms in there. It's crazy. I still can't really understand it. I just know that Eddie showed up at my shop. I gave him a board, and 2 weeks later, he came back with this mason jar of organic soil. That was my board. And it's phenomenal. Kevin? There you go. Recycle everything? Buy eco boards? I don't know. It's honestly pretty simple. Just spread the word, really, that there's better options. But again, it's all on the consumer. So we have to, one of my biggest jobs is to educate, is why I'm here talking about this, so that we can, let everyone know there's better ways to make these things, and just, sharing the stoke on it and explaining exactly what we're doing.
I think one of the things that I had mentioned before when I'd done a talk, which hopefully I could leave you guys with, is I call it the 5 Ps, but it's passionate curiosity, it leads you to your purpose, and through perseverance, engages people into meaningful partnerships. And I think that's something that you've exemplified, Ryan has. So thank you so much for your story. And I think really it's about talking story, right? We just talk story with each other, and people engage and are innately attracted to the story, the personal story, right? And so even when I've covered so many different people, from athletes to musicians to everyday citizens, and there's a reason why we engage, and we want someone, we want a champion for them to win, or want their widget or whatever it is, or their ability to win the gold medal or whatever, is because we know their story. So I think I would encourage everyone here to get to know each other, and when there's networking and breakout, to talk story and to get everybody else's story and see how you all can collaborate. And thank you so much, Ryan. Sorry, I was a little bit late, and appreciate Vite putting this together.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And we will move on to the next part of the Rising Tide Summit. Yeah?
Awesome. Thanks so much.